With the release this weekend of Mortal Kombat on HBO Max, we thought we'd take a look back at the franchise's earlier installments. Because we drew the short straw, we're going to take a look at Mortal Kombat Annihilation.
It's a trap.
Mortal Kombat Annihilation is a very bad movie. However, bad movies are often revealing. Part of this is down to their inherent artlessness. It's easy to get swept up in a well-constructed film and to miss the larger designs at work within it. To use a familiar metaphor, filmmaking is like magic. The key to the construction of a good trick is that the audience never sees the wires holding it together. With bad films, there's nothing for the audience to do but stare at the wires and figure out the mechanics working behind them. There's a bizarre honesty to misfires like Terminator Genisys. Cinematic video game adaptations are notoriously variable in quality. Yeah, let's go with variable there. Part of this is mechanical, down to things like ludic elements. The reality that watching a story unfold on screen will always be fundamentally different from shaping that narrative through gameplay. This is particularly true when adapting something like a fighting game, where there's a fundamental difference between watching and playing. Adaptation across media is hard. It is not a direct or literal process. Action auteur and cinematic wife guy Paul W.S. Anderson's Mortal Kombat is not necessarily an all-time classic, but it is a film constructed with a clear understanding of what it is doing and how best to do that. Anderson has talked about how he played Mortal Kombat in arcades long before he got involved with the movie, and a large part of the success of Anderson's Mortal Kombat is in the attempt to replicate the feeling of playing the video game, rather than aiming for complete textual fidelity to the source material's continuity or canon. Anderson understands what's important in Mortal Kombat, because it's what was important to the game. For example, it's important for Johnny Cage to do the ball breaker, because the dev team took the care to animate specific character reactions to it. It's important for Goro to look like a Ray Harryhausen special effect, because the dev team drew from movies like Jason the Argonauts and Clash of the Titans in designing him. Anderson's priority is constructing a movie that is functional as a vehicle for delivering those moments. The basic plot of Mortal Kombat is a direct lift from B-movie classics like Enter the Dragon and Bloodsport. There's also probably some hard target in there, in that it's a movie about the importance of punching a reptile. Things happen in the movie that did not happen in the game because they're necessary for the film to function, such as the death of random supporting characters to establish stakes around villains like Shang Tsung and Goro. Mortal Kombat grossed over $120 million on a $20 million budget. I'm no Hollywood accountant, but that seems pretty good.
Sorry.
While reviews were not ecstatic, they were stronger than for contemporary video game adaptations like Super Mario Bros. Or Double Dragon. A sequel was greenlit. Anderson opted to direct Event Horizon instead, his dark and gritty reboot of Back to the Future.
What happened to your eyes?
Where we're going, we won't need eyes to see.
As a result, Mortal Kombat cinematographer John Orleanetti was tapped to direct the follow-up. Much was made of how the film would feature 300 completely digital effects shots, about 100 more than the original film. Of course, nobody promised those 300 completely digital shots would be good. They didn't even promise that they'd be, well, complete. Mortal Kombat Annihilation is a stunningly shoddy film. The script, most of the performances, the editing, the production design, and the special effects are terrible. The plot makes no sense and invites all sorts of weird questions. What exactly is up with Shao Kahn's evil plan to ensnare the heroes? Why does Motaro wear a codpiece on the front of his horse body? When we first meet Jax, why is he tied to a metal bed in an abandoned medical facility? Did they just, run off and leave him there? Also, he seems like he can just let himself out whenever he wants. Is it a sex thing? It's probably a sex thing. While it will be easy to spend an entire video contemplating these questions and more, is Baraka made of gasoline? The clumsiness of Annihilation is primarily interesting in that it reveals the mechanics of what the studio is attempting. Annihilation is an unforgivably bad movie, but it's also a somewhat prophetic movie. Watched more than 2 decades removed from its original context, there's a surprising amount of the modern blockbuster to be found in Annihilation, just executed without any skill whatsoever. This is most obvious in taking a big picture look at Mortal Kombat and Annihilation. While neither offers a particularly interesting story of itself, Mortal Kombat was clearly designed with a framework that could support what Anderson wanted to do with the movie. Liu Kang and Sonya Blade, for example, are both motivated by the death of family and friends, which gives them a clear personal motivation to get through the movie. In contrast, while Annihilation opens with the death of Johnny Cage, the movie very quickly becomes a jumble of weird competing motivations and themes that are at once incredibly generic and needlessly convoluted. To be honest, Annihilation is perhaps most interesting as a movie about Raiden's midlife crisis, in which the demigod literally becomes a new man, gets a sexy new haircut, starts hanging out with people much younger than he is, and begins to suffer with some of the performance issues that face all gods of a certain age. More seriously though, it frequently seems like nobody has any idea what Annihilation is supposed to be about. Characters get weird arcs lifted directly from self-help books. Sonya learns that she has to trust other people. Jax learns that real strength doesn't come from cyborg arms, but from self-confidence. I know this because the film helpfully communicates it by having characters literally state these arcs to one another at the climax.
So you finally got your confidence back, huh?
Finally asked for help, huh?
If Annihilation has a core theme, and let's face it, that's a big if, it is a movie about family, especially found family. The film is about the heroes accepting one another as, well, family. And again, I know this because
We're family now.
even Raiden's arc involves the character rejecting his biological family in favor of the family that he has found on Earth.
Rule all realms with your family. They are my family.
Of course, there's no reason why a Mortal Kombat movie should be about these themes. After all, while self-confidence is undoubtedly great, and we should all praise Jax on his journey to self-fulfillment, one imagines that the core appeal of giving Jax metal arms in the first place is that he might use them to punch a giant horseman in the codpiece that he is inexplicably wearing on his horse chest. The theme of family is a similarly awkward fit in a movie based on a fighting game so graphic that it reportedly inspired the creation of an entire rating system for video games. These thematic choices make more sense if you read the film as the product of a generic approach to these sorts of blockbusters. After all, self-actualization is one of the most universal themes in broad blockbuster movies. More than that, modern cinema has come to be dominated by movies that are about the theme of family.
Believe it or not, Deadpool 2 is a family film.
There are lots of reasons why modern blockbusters trend towards family as a theme. It's universal, it's recognizable, it's apolitical.
Freddy, we're a family.
It's a nice catch-all theme, one that imbues a work with the weight of theme without any of the burden of figuring out something more specific.
I don't have friends. I got family.
Annihilation taps into this idea of found family as a hook to anchor a blockbuster that really has nothing else to say. In terms of this absence of meaning, it's notable that the villains spend a lot of Annihilation describing Outworld's invasion of Earthrealm as a merger, suggesting the dry and cynical calculations of brand middle management as opposed to any tangible sense of threat. Shao Kahn repeatedly sounds like he can't wait to get his hands on Earthrealm's accounts.
Father, the merger has begun.
This emptiness is not the only reason that Annihilation feels like a misshapen prototype for a generation of blockbusters that would follow. In many ways, Annihilation feels like the first true fanservice blockbuster, a film adapting a property from another medium without any real understanding of the art of adaptation or of the work being adapted. It seems to have been shepherded through production with the assumption that audiences will just show up for things that they recognize. Mortal Kombat features about a dozen characters from the video game. Annihilation features 22 characters from the video game, and dialogue referencing 2 more that they just couldn't squeeze in.
Cabal and Stryker.
That's about 1 character every 4 minutes of screen time.
Liu Kang, Kitana, Raiden, Sonya, Jax, Shao Kahn, Shinnok, Jade, Shiva, Night, Johnny Cage, Scorpion, Rain, Baraka, Sub-Zero, Melina.
None of these characters make any real sense or have any real impact on the plot. Sub-Zero and Scorpion, for example, show up for a single scene as the franchise's most popular characters, and then disappear never to be seen or referenced again, presumably so the scene could be cut if necessary. However, all of this is built on the understanding that the audience wants to see these characters, and wants to see a film adaptation that ports as much of the mythology over as directly and literally as possible, without any real effort to integrate these elements into a satisfying whole. While Mortal Kombat included a shout out to Johnny Cage's ball breaker, Annihilation is saturated with references to particular character movesets. Kitana suddenly has her bladed fans. In his brief appearance, Johnny Cage does a variation on his shadow kick. Shao Kahn employs an example of his shoulder charge. Sub-Zero even uses his ice clone move. Perhaps ill-advisedly given the result, the climax of Annihilation hinges on the use of animalities, which have been introduced in Mortal Kombat 3. Annihilation believes that fan service is enough of itself. In this sense, it feels like a testing ground for the approach that certain studios would adopt during the superhero boom that would follow. This approach confuses fan service and reference for quality. Movies like X-Men: The Last Stand and Spider-Man 3 are packed with fan service and reference. The Last Stand is an adaptation of both the Dark Phoenix saga and Gifted, and is populated by a variety of unnecessary characters and weird fan service.
I'm the Juggernaut, bitch!
Venom only appears in Spider-Man 3 because producer Avi Arad begged director Sam Raimi to listen to the fans and incorporate the character, even if he didn't fit into the movie that Raimi wanted to make. To be fair, fan service isn't inherently bad of itself. It's possible for a skilled creative team to pull off this sort of fan service in a way that doesn't feel as transparently cynical in its efforts to capitalize on an intellectual property that they don't necessarily understand. Both Infinity War and Endgame are saturated with fan service and references, deep cuts and in-jokes. The problem arises when those elements are treated as an end unto themselves. The logic behind this approach is transparent. It's from the source material, fans want it, it should be in the movie. It doesn't matter that the idea might not work without a narrative framework to support it, that it doesn't fit with this approach to the concept, or that telling a story in one medium is fundamentally different from experiencing it in another. 2 decades later, Annihilation looks like a crude and misshapen prototype for the worst impulses of the modern intellectual property boom. Mortal Kombat Annihilation is a terrible film, but an instructive one. I've been Darren Mooney, and this was In the Frame.